Daniel Harris, good morning to you. A brilliant audition on Monday Night Football last night from a young foreign manager who's Champions League experience, knows what it's like to work with a restrictive board, and great transfer record. Brendan Rodgers, come on down.
Yes, I mean, Rodgers is really good, and it was one of those games where basically everything went as he said it would. And yeah, his team gave a really good performance, and they're really starting to play well. And they look, I mean, around about this time last season, probably for a little bit longer, there were people talking about whether Leicester could challenge for the title, and never seemed quite that realistic. But this season, maybe it isn't realistic this season either, but it's certainly a lot more realistic this season than last season, because Man City and Liverpool have both dropped a bit, and Leicester have bought really well again, so they've got loads of options. I mean, they're still without four or five first-team players, so yeah, they look really good. The question, I think, is also whether when teams don't come onto them, whether they've got enough, and they do have the kind of players that can unpick tight defences, but I guess we'll see.
Yeah, and it's going to be an interesting ride to see exactly where he ends up in his career. Surely he's not really in the running for the Manchester United gig, is he?
Well, I guess the Manchester United gig isn't quite available yet, so there is that. I don't think he would be someone that you would never consider, but he might be someone that you would not consider at the beginning. Partly, I mean, he used to be the manager of Liverpool, which is a good place not to start if you want to be United manager. But I'm sure, on the other hand, he'd probably do quite a good job with these players.
That stuff matters, unfortunately.
Yeah, it doesn't matter in every country necessarily. I mean, if you look in Italy, for example, the best Italian players, all of them, the best players who've played in Italy seem to have played for almost everyone. But yeah, it does matter in England. We don't see it very often. I know people remember the aggravation when George Graham went to Tottenham, when Steve Bruce went from Sunderland to Newcastle, and well, first of all, when he went to Sunderland as a Geordie. And I don't think people were particularly keen when he then turned up at Newcastle. And then he gave some people other reasons not to be keen on him with the kind of football that they had to watch. But then at the same time, there were other people probably that were quite pleased with the points he was getting. So, yeah, I think what you find is people don't like it when a manager who's linked to a rival joins them. And then in the first instance, and then as soon as things go wrong, it then becomes quite a significant issue.
Yeah. Okay, let's consummate this conversation then, because the reason we want to talk about last night's football is really because Mauricio Pochettino, with his sylvan locks, appeared. There was a bit of godlight around him. Maybe that was just on my TV, I don't know. But it looked like this was how you would arrive if you were the Messiah, particularly in 2020 in football terms. You appear on Monday Night Football and you get a few softballs thrown at you, and life is great. He's obviously the greatest manager of all time. Certainly that's my takeaway from last night.
He didn't present himself like a man who turned up for a job interview. That is for sure. He looked extremely scruffy. But yeah, I think Pochettino is, he was as you think he is, I think. Like, he's someone who it's very easy to see why the players would run through walls for him. He just seems like a really nice bloke. He loves football. And I think that really came through when he was talking about supporters, and how one of the reasons he's not minding being out of football so much is that it basically is a different sport without the fans. And it also reminds you that his teams always play with intensity, and thinking about jobs that he might get, the kind of jobs that he might get are where that intensity is not always there under the current managers. And I guess it was kind of quite nice to see Pochettino. I thought it was really interesting also what he said when I think Jamie Carragher said to him, when did you feel that the Spurs players were your players? And he said, right from the beginning. And I think that tells you, first of all, that about the atmosphere that he wants to create. It's in some ways the opposite of the atmosphere that you sometimes see Mourinho creating, where he feels a closeness to his players, and also the fact that he's taking responsibility from the off, that the results are up to him and they're on him, and they're not on the people that preceded him.
Is intensity quite high up in the list of priorities for Manchester United at this point, especially in the context of what happened on Sunday?
Yeah, I would say that when the thing with United at the moment is that their top level is really a pretty good level. If United play really well, then you would back them to beat or give a good game to any team in the world. And we've seen that against PSG. We've seen it against Manchester City. We've seen it against Leipzig. That if they play well, then they're solid at the back, and they have the midfield to run other teams off the pitch and to stifle them, and they have attackers that can give any defence a difficult night. But the problem, as you say, against Arsenal at the weekend was Arsenal pressed them, sure, and Arteta got his tactics right. But the biggest difference between the teams was intensity. Arsenal had it and United didn't. And then you see Harry Maguire after the game talking about maybe we were complacent. And it was, you won one game in a row. How could you possibly be complacent? And that isn't necessarily, a problem with Solskjaer. Obviously it is, because as we just said, they're his players. But some of these players have been like that for 2 and 3 managers. So there's a lot of blame to go around, so there's no need to be sparing. So you can allocate it in all the various directions. But Luke Shaw's been like that for 3 managers at United now, and also managers at Southampton. So to say, well, that's Ole's fault is harsh in some ways. Paul Pogba is like that. That is the kind of player that he can be sometimes. So when he's conceded 3 penalties in 6 starts in the league. You can blame Solskjaer for picking him. I'm not sure you can blame Solskjaer for the actual thing that we saw happening.
Do you then also apportion some blame to how Solskjaer approached the game tactically on Sunday? Because obviously it is the intensity and the way the players applied themselves, which is definitely the main contributing factor. But it does seem strange to me that there was such a good plan for Paris Saint-Germain, such a good plan for RB Leipzig, and maybe an absence of a good plan for a game against Arsenal, arguably the lesser of those 3 opposition.
I think when you're not the best team or not a perfect team, it means that when you play matches, particularly against other ones of the better teams, you can't just go and play. So if you watch Liverpool, more or less, they play the same way every time, because they know that if they play well, and even if they don't play well, they're probably going to win. When you're not that good, you have to mess things around. You have to try and find different systems and different personnel for each game. And it seemed reasonable that United, it looked against Leipzig that maybe this diamond actually is the best way of hiding faults and elevating strengths, because United don't have any wide players. Well, a diamond doesn't require wingers. United have good strikers. Okay, well, pick 2 of them then. And teams don't like to mark. Defenders aren't used to marking 2 strikers. And it means also with a diamond, you don't lose a numbers game in midfield. So playing that formation made some sort of sense. There still is a weakness out wide, because with a diamond, you're relying on your fullbacks to provide your width. And without Alex Telles, United don't really have fullbacks who are able to do that. But I think that one of the mistakes that Solskjaer made was that he switched Fred and Scott McTominay. So Scott McTominay, against Leipzig, he played at the base of the diamond. Against Arsenal, he played on the right-hand side. In theory, that should make sense, because the players that play on the sides of the diamonds have to do a lot of running. And McTominay has great physicality, great strength, great running power. But the way he played, it looked like he hadn't really been coached how to play that position. And that United were definitely too slow to tell him to stay out wide or to swap him with Fred or whatever it was. But I think the main problem with the way the system worked, and this isn't even necessarily a problem with the system, because this would have been the case whatever way United played, was that Arsenal pressed them in possession high up the pitch. And United don't really have a midfield specialist, someone who plays in front of the back 4, whose passing and whose touch and whose vision and whose awareness are good enough to pass out from the back 4. They have 2 players in the team who might be able to do that, who don't play that position, really, Axel Tuanzebe and Donny van de Beek. And it's easy for me to sit here and be wise after the event. Like I wrote on Friday morning that United should carry on with the diamond, but it's not my job to see this stuff coming. Are they going to Solskjaer stuff to see this coming? Arsenal were always likely to press, because they often play that way. And we saw when United played Southampton, when United played Villa, when United played West Ham at the end of last season, that those teams did that to United, and United really struggled with it. And United either didn't seem to have thought that might happen, or the solution they tried to find was not the right solution, and they didn't do anything to change it in terms of personnel. They tried a different formation in the second half. worked a little bit better. But one of the things that was problematic in the game was that the changes didn't work, so that in the end, players who should have stayed on went off, and players who probably shouldn't have come on came on, and the whole thing looked an absolute mess.
Just one more on Pochettino, Daniel. You say that Luke Shaw and Paul Pogba take a fair deal of the blame because of their inability to work overly hard or exert themselves in that sort of system. Do you then think that Pochettino will need a transfer window or two to replace those sort of players, and that it isn't going to be a plug-and-play sort of system like we saw previously with Southampton and Tottenham under Pochettino?
Not necessarily. With those two players, I wouldn't say that they're not willing to work hard. It isn't that. There's sometimes a lack of intensity in the way that they play. And like Luke Shaw's been really good recently, but yeah, this was not a good day. So I mean, I think that Pochettino already has an alternative to Luke Shaw. He has Alex Telles, and I don't think it will be long before Alex Telles takes Luke Shaw's place.
Daniel, you accidentally said Pochettino already has an alternative to Luke Shaw at left back.
No, I didn't say accidentally.
Okay, so you've already appointed him in your head. It sounds like you've already appointed him. This is what you want. This is Freudian. I thought that was Freudian. My bad. Sorry.
No. When you said Daniel, you accidentally. I'm thinking. I don't think I said anything that began with F or C. But no. The question was about. Do I think that Pochettino would be able to impose his style, and with Luke Shaw and Pogba? And I think he already, or anyone, has those options already. United have Donny van de Beek. And they also have other different kinds of midfield players. They don't have to pick Paul Pogba in terms of they could easily construct a midfield with the things, not with Paul Pogba's unique attributes. And Paul Pogba playing really well is a really good player, obviously. But they have Donny van de Beek, who is another attacking midfield player. And so they don't actually need Paul Pogba in that aspect. And they already have Alex Telles, so they don't need to have Luke Shaw. But Luke Shaw, as I said, he played really well against Leipzig. He played really well on the left of a back three against PSG. He didn't play well against Arsenal. If you're playing a diamond, Alex Telles, and if you're playing 3-4-3 or 3-5-2, on the left of that midfield, Alex Telles is a much better option because he can attack. And I also think he probably has a different mentality to Luke Shaw. Luke Shaw, you watch Luke Shaw play, and it looks like he's got to where he's got on talent mainly. Whereas Alex Telles, if you read about him and you hear people talking about Alex Telles has had to work a lot harder, I would say, to get to where he's got to than Luke Shaw. And he got to Porto quite late in his career. He's got to United quite late in his career. That might sound alarm bells ringing because it makes you wonder, are you actually any good? But people that know Alex Telles a lot better than me think that Alex Telles most definitely is good and absolutely is better than Luke Shaw. So I think every time United have one of these disasters, I still find myself thinking, there's a good team in there. There's not a league champion team in there probably, but there is a good team in there. And it doesn't need that many signings to be a team that you think might be able to challenge for the league. And we see, again, that their best level, I keep saying this, their best level is a really good level. The problem is that they don't hit their best level often enough, and that their lowest level is an absolutely disgusting level. And that was the level we saw against Arsenal. Let
me ask you this. If you're in Solskjaer's kitchen cabinet or war room cabinet, and it seemed like Gary Neville after the match last night was perhaps volunteering some help with that, it was like time to make some very tough decisions for him. What can you do to save your job? Because 2 weeks ago, I would have said that essentially Solskjaer felt like he was safe for the rest of the season because the team was performing so well in Europe that it would be crazy to sack a manager who's top of his Champions League group, and who knows what might happen in that competition. It seems like he will get stuff right over a period of time. The team are getting fitter. All the things that he said was wrong with them, you could point to evidence to back up that he was correct. And yet, here we are again, where Pochettino appears on TV, the clamour for the debate around the next manager, all that kind of stuff, it crescendos again. If you are advising him, or if you are Solskjaer talking to himself, what are you saying that you need to change immediately to wrestle the narrative back?
I think the problem is that what it's starting to look like a cycle, isn't it? Where you have some really good performances, then you have some that are so unspeakably bad, and then you get to a point where it looks like one or two more defeats and you're going to be in trouble. Then they produce a couple more good performances and you think they've got it, and then they produce some more disgraceful performances and you think, So I've been saying this for a long time, that Pogba and Matic are going to get him sacked. And when I say that, I don't mean that Pogba and Matic aren't good players who can't offer anything to the team, who aren't useful in the right circumstances, but they are common factors in some of United's worst performances, also in some of United's best performances. But again, it's not really about the best performances, it's about the worst performances. And they are common factors in some of those. And some of the worst things that you see consistently in the team. When I think about what are the worst things about the worst performances, it's a lack of speed to the ball, it's a lack of speed on the ball, it's a lack of clever forward passing, and that is Matic and some of Pogba. And I think that when I look at Solskjaer's teams, and I think, well, if I were him, I'd be thinking, well, I've got some of these players who are not the future. United are not going to win or challenge for league titles with Nemanja Matic. He's old, he's miles past his best, so I would be trying to not include him wherever possible, because I'd be trying to build the team that might be able to do that. Pogba has let United down so often, and there'll always be circumstances. It's not like Pogba needs good players to play with and all of this, and what position does he play, and perhaps he needs to play here, and perhaps he needs to play there. Ultimately, over the last 4 years, Paul Pogba hasn't been good enough. It's that simple. He's had a lot of opportunities, a lot of different systems, a lot of different positions, 2 different managers, and it hasn't worked. And when Paul Pogba plays really badly, it looks really bad. And so I would be trying to pick Donny van de Beek ahead of him wherever I could, and trying to use Pogba as some kind of impact sub, or maybe further forward when United play teams who are likely to sit back. But in teams who are likely to get stuck into United, that is not where Pogba flourishes. And so I guess those are the kind of changes. I'd be trying to get Alex Telles in as soon as possible. I think the other thing that has to be said, and I thought really looked the case at the weekend, was that Anthony Martial getting himself suspended for 3 games was extremely unhelpful. And when you play against the press, one way around the press is getting the ball forward as quickly as possible, getting the ball over the press or through the press. And he holds the ball up much better than Mason Greenwood and Marcus Rashford do. And United really missed him at the weekend, because every time they got the ball forward, they would either be fouled or tackled. And Martial is a bit more robust than Greenwood, and a bit more robust than Rashford, so would either have been able to stand up to the fouls, and there were quite a few of them, and I felt like Gabriel and Holding got away with quite a few potential cards in that game. But obviously, that's not why United lost, just an observation.
Yeah.
I feel like Anthony Martial has the physical presence to perhaps have been able to have ridden those better than Rashford and Greenwood did. But Solskjaer should know by now which players he can rely on to put in a shift, and which players are likely to put him under pressure by not turning up. And he needs to stop including them, and try and include his better players. Really.
Fair enough. Give me a number of months that you think before we end up having these conversations about who will replace Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. Are we at a 3 month? Are we at a 1 month? Is it that short?
It depends. Are you asking me when I think he's going to get fired, or if I think he's going to get fired, or when I think United will have their next awful run?
I guess the awful run will presage the sacking. So.
I don't think he's that far from getting fired. But again, I don't think he's that far from having a team that is pretty good. So it's really hard to see. I mean, if they don't beat Istanbul and they lose to Everton at the weekend, then he's in big trouble. I think they probably will beat Istanbul, and I wouldn't be surprised to see a good performance against Everton at the weekend either. So. I'm not expecting him to get sacked in the next few weeks. I think that he'll be all right this week, and then they're in a position where the games start to get a bit easier, and Martial comes back, and Van de Beek will be and Telles will be a bit more used to the league. So I don't think he'll get fired in the next month or so. So I don't think we'll be having a serious conversation about this in the next month or so, but it could easily happen.
Who knows? Daniel, great stuff this morning. Thanks a million. Always
see you again, man. Bye, have a good day.
Dennis on YouTube says, Daniel Harris, great insight as usual, up there with your best contributors. Great show, something to look forward to in these miserable times. Thanks for that, Dennis. And thanks for the comments as well. We really appreciate it. 0879 180 180 is the WhatsApp number. On YouTube, Ger Breen says, Ole Gunnar Solskjaer has bought really well, in my opinion. He needs a few more transfer windows to get the squad that he wants, and to get rid of the deadwood he inherited from the 3 previous managers in 6 years. Changing the manager again at this point seems ridiculous and clearly indicative of the people really responsible for United's problems deflecting the attention from themselves. I mean, I think that is 100% correct. We're going to take a quick break. We're back with the newspapers and your top stories, where we'll be talking a bit more about the possibility of Galway going straight through to the Connacht football final. Stay tuned.